So as I was saying, I'm going to go on to the main topic, and I want to talk about something subtle that's powerful. And that's the frame that we use to see the world. And I'm not just talking about film or video, but the frame of our attention and the way that we're being taught to look at life through our phones, and ultimately how we communicate with each other. Because for most of human history, our natural view has been horizontal, eyes side by side, taking in wide horizons, a sky, a crowd of people, a landscape. And that's how we understand the world, in context and in breadth. But then came our smartphones, and with them came a revolution which flipped the frame. Suddenly, the most common way we watch has been turned from horizontal to vertical. And that's a resolution of like typically 1080 by 1920 instead of our usual 1920 by 1080. We're talking about television or screens. And we squished the world down into a corridor which narrowed our vision. And it's not because that's a better way to see things, but it's because it's more profitable, it's more addictive, and it's more controllable. It's the will of social media platforms, and nobody asked for this. And this change isn't just aesthetic, it rewires how we pay attention. Portrait video demands focus on a single subject, a face, a product, a snappy idea, while eliminating much of the surrounding noise. And the world outside the frame doesn't just disappear visually, it disappears conceptually. And we're being trained to think in short, punchy clips. And the short form video is more than a style, it's a curriculum, it's a plan, it's an agenda. And if you can't explain your idea in 15 or 13 seconds, it doesn't belong. And that mindset seeps into everything: speech, writing, argument, learning. And this isn't new. Neil Postman, he spoke about this, and if you kind of look at it in a sense, he warned us decades ago in a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death, that every medium carries a bias. Television biases towards entertainment. Today, our smartphones bias us towards immediacy and constant motion and shallow reactions. And there's a science of attention that explains a lot of this. And it isn't just an opinion. In 2024, EEG company, they'd done a study that found that high use of short form mobile video relates to weaker executive control in the brain. And in other words, the more you scroll, the harder it becomes to concentrate, the harder it becomes to plan, and the harder it becomes to resist impulse. And another study in 2023 showed that using TikTok-style feeds impairs your perspective memory, and that's your ability to remember to do things, in the future. It's not just the stuff, do you know what I mean? And there's a real neurological, I'm being burgled. And there's a real neurological cost to this as well. And the more we, use this sprint-like consumption, the more we suffer, because medium really does shape us. So going back to Neil Postman, he argued that the form of a medium controls the content that it can really carry. And he coined a phrase called the information action ratio, meaning that today you might consume tons of information, but the chance you actually do something with it's very small. We're glutted with data, but starving for meaning. And I've talked about this time and time again over the last 7 years, in the OB show. I slip it in sometimes, or I've done whole sections on it. And people kind of agree, but they don't care. People aren't, I don't think, putting enough work into fighting a system of control that, abuses us, if you will, with this technology. So in the world which we currently are, vertical clips and instant reactions, we lose serious public discourse. The kind that requires argument or nuance and time more than anything. It's slowly being squeezed out. And we've been coerced into thinking as the social media platforms want us to. They've printed guidelines on how to present information, which all the influencers and popular reels follow, and none of it being beneficial to the viewers. It's simply about gaining more attention, more hits, and more advertising revenues for this platform. So what's the alternative? How do we resist being shaped by a narrow frame? So there are some solutions. And first one's awareness. Know that the frame is actually there. Don't pretend it's neutral. Be so aware that you know what you're doing. And I know that sounds obvious, but once you get pulled into these things, they become second nature and you just treat it as normal. Don't do that. Second, choose wide and choose long. Read a long form article, watch a film on a proper screen, watch without your phone and let your mind stretch. And it's so important. I talked a while ago about how we've suddenly turned from reading long form, and it's got smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, from these tomes into tiny novels, into booklets, into pamphlets, into leaflets, and now people just want to read like one line. If you write more than like 3 paragraphs on your status, people don't read it. They just like it. They go, okay, I know, and they go past. You put on the bottom, if you read this to the end, type the word yellow in the comments, and 2 people do. No one else, spots it. I've tried it so many times after I saw it, created by someone else. And I wonder what we're actually saying to each other, or what people are taking in when they're watching snippets of video in portrait mode and snippets of information. Because at the end of the day, when we communicate, we want to, pass some information on to someone. It's how we communicate, how we get the thoughts out of our minds into other humans, how things propagate. And when you look at it from that perspective, you start understanding this is important to our survival. This is important to how we communicate, to how we grow, to how we learn, and how we love each other. But people are allowing it to get smaller and smaller and smaller. In the end, it's just going to be binary. And this is what I talked about as part of that last time. We just become these little peons that just function on yes, no, yes, no. I think that's the goal. So what they're taking control of our minds. These people who are running the show, the elite, the Illuminati, the lizard people, whatever you want to call them, okay? They're just rich human beings, evil human beings, who've told us this is how the world is eternally. And now they're saying, wow, look what we can do with these peons. And they seem to be like autonomous agents running around doing their own thing. But now watch how we can manipulate them even more so and get them moving about with this digital age. And now they've moved to a point where they're saying, you know what, we can actually get these people to obey our every command, but not just obey our commands in the sense of telling them stories, but just making them react to yes and no and turn them into the binary digits that make the human computer. And that's what they're building. Anyway, third point I was going to talk about, use your own voice, okay? That's really, really important. Use your own voice for everything. Communicate that way with people and with each other. Use your own time. Write, speak, record yourself, but don't force your thinking into 15 seconds of short sound bites. And the fourth, push back. Be critical of platforms that prioritize ultra short content. Go to the places that support long medium and have some depth and discussion and get yourself back into that mode. Because at the moment, all you're doing is getting dopamine hits and you're thinking to yourself, oh, this is nice, this is nice, this is nice. And it's a form of drug. It really, really is. And stretching the mind is really important. People are no longer able to read long form messages or to digest and then infer. And I mean it when I say portrait video and short form clips are not neutral tools. They're powerful forces that reshape how we see and how we think and how we communicate. But the frame doesn't have to be a prison. We can claim the widescreen view in a sense, and we can slow down. We can demand more depth. And most of all, we can choose attention over automatic reaction. And if we do that, we don't just resist the frame, but we reclaim our view of the world. I am Neo